Now today, you and I, we don't find ourselves in life or death situations like this, but the reality is this, that every single day, we are confronted with moments where our decision to speak up or not speak up could end up making all the difference in the world. For example, if you're frustrated with your spouse or a family member, your decision to speak up or not to speak up could make a huge difference in how that relationship works out. Or if you have a friend who's going down a bad path in life, your decision to speak up or not to speak up could make a huge difference in ultimately what happens to your friend. Or even if you're out in public and you see something dangerous or you see something that doesn't seem right, your decision to speak up or not to speak up could make a huge difference for the people in that situation. And so in light of our passage this morning, I want to leave you with 3 things to keep in mind when you're speaking up. In other words, whenever you find yourself in a situation where you feel compelled to speak up, these 3 things will help you to answer the why in terms of why am I speaking up in the first place? Because friends, as we've seen today with Esther, once you know why you're speaking up and you're confident about that, all the other details will fall right into place. Okay, here's the first one. We need to determine the value of speaking up. In other words, we need to take some time to determine what will happen if we do speak up and what will happen if we don't. Remember Esther, before she went and spoke to the king, what did she do? She said, hey, if I don't speak up, my people are going to be killed. And if I do speak up, well, I could be killed, but my people could be saved. And from there, she was able to determine the value of speaking up. And today, I think you and I, we also need to take some time to determine the value of speaking up. You remember this verse from Ecclesiastes? King Solomon says, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Meaning that there are some times where we should speak up, and there are other times that maybe we shouldn't. For example, if you have a friend, a coworker, a neighbor that you see about to make a really bad decision, that is a valuable time to speak up. To say, hey, I know you're about to do this. I know what's going to happen. It's not going to go well. Please do not go down this path. Okay, that is a valuable time that you can speak up. On the other hand, if you have a spouse or a family member who's constantly making mistakes, maybe they forgot to pick up milk at the store, or they didn't do the dishes, or they didn't set the AC up before they left, you pointing out every single thing and speaking up is probably not going to be worth it. In fact, oftentimes it's probably going to hurt the relationship a whole lot more by speaking up at every single time they mess up. And so that's the first thing we have to consider, is that when we speak up, we need to determine the value of speaking up, to say, hey, what could happen if I speak up? And what could happen if I don't? Now, the second one is this, to taste your words before you spit them out. Okay, in other words, think about what you're going to say before you say it. Remember Queen Esther? How many days did she fast and pray before she went to speak to the king? 3 days, right? 3 days that she got to taste her words before she ultimately spit them out. I love this proverb. It always humbles me. Take a look at this. It says, do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. One time I went to breakfast over at Tripp's Diner in Seminole with a good friend, and as we sat down at one of the tables, he said that he had broken up with his girlfriend. And immediately I said, well, it's about time. And he just sort of looked at me, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? Now, here's the thing. He agreed with me. It was about time, but that was not the first thing that he needed to hear out of my mouth, right? When it comes to speaking up, we need to make sure that we are tasting our words before we spit them out. In other words, we need to think about what it is we're saying before we actually say it. And then finally, number 3, when it comes to speaking up, we need to speak up at the right time, not at the perfect time. Now, that may seem like the same thing, right time and perfect time, but there's a really important difference. Speaking up at the right time is focused on the why, and speaking up at the perfect time is focused on the when. For example, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt compelled to speak up? Maybe you needed to say something to a family member or a friend or a coworker, and an opportunity arose to speak up. And you convinced yourself, you said, no, this just isn't a good time. And then another opportunity arose, and you were like, no, that's not a good time either. And then another time came, and you're like, no, that's not a good time either. And friends, now it's been months or even years, and you still have not said something to that person. And the reason you haven't said anything is because you're waiting for the perfect time, with the perfect conditions, with the perfect setting, when in reality that perfect time is probably never going to come.